Hey, welcome back. While I am waiting for my router bits to show up for that problem that I had with doing the carving, I've been working on the engraving and the inlay work on the fretboard, and I've spent a lot of time on it. And I thought, this would probably be a good opportunity to show you a video. So let me show you my screen real quick. So what I'm working on is getting the fretboard ready. Since I can't really do anything else with the body until the router bit shows up, and I think it actually showed up today, but I've been working pretty feverishly on this instead. So I have got my fretboard process kind of in four different steps. And I am doing inlays on the fretboard. Now, I know a lot of people aren't doing inlay work, but I wanted to cover this and just in case you are. So my first step is to start with my inlays. And this is what my inlays are going to look like. Now, keep in mind, everything that you see on the screen is going to be much bigger than it is in real life. And that has actually caused me a problem that I wanted to go through on this. So first, this is what my fret markers are going to look like. Just a little cross that I put together. I like the way it looks. Skeeter will like it. So their very first step that I wanted to do was to make these crosses. So I drew them out in Fusion. So I want to cut a bunch of these out because I know I'm going to make some mistake. I think I need 11 altogether, but I'm going to make more because they're so small. They're going to be really fragile. I'm probably going to break one. There's just mistakes are going to be made. Just planning for that. So this is what it looks like. And the very first thing that I did is I've come in here well, this was where I went to the design tab, but my first sketch was just the cross itself. And then I hid that and I created another sketch and did an array. And this is really kind of a nice thing that you can do. You can put one of these things on your sketch, and instead of just doing it over and over and over again, you can come up here when you're in your sketch. And if I wanted to make, let's just say I only had one. You highlight this, you go over here to create and rectangular pattern, and then you can say I want a bunch, 20. Just give it a direction, and it'll let you drag this out across your whole workpiece until you get it to the size that you want. You say, well, I didn't really want 20. I wanted fewer than that. You can do this. And this is basically how I laid these crosses out on here. And then you can stretch them out the other way. And that way you get a whole bunch of identical stuff. And so that's what I've got right here. And then once I get them here, I didn't need to extrude them or anything because for an engraving operation, it's just really not necessary. I came over here to my manufacturer tab. I created a new setup, and this is what my setup looks like. And I've just selected my Onefinity machine. It says generic, but it's using my Masso controller because I've got the Elite Foreman. And this is a milling operation, and I just chose my box point down here as my starting position. And I always go to stock, and I always say no stock offset. I'm sure there's a reason for this. I just haven't found it in my workflow. So I went over here and I just told it to set that as my user default. And so I don't have to check this anymore. Then I created a couple of toolpaths. So the first one, this is a trace operation. I'll show you the engrave operation in a minute. So I did a 2D trace operation, and that created this. Okay. And then because these things are so small, my 90-degree V bit isn't going to work. You can see the bit that I'm using over here. It's actually a 20-degree bit. And so I went and selected this. I use speed tools quite a bit because they're cheap, and if you break them, you don't cry much. And they've been great. I've broken a couple of bits, and they just send me another one. I got no complaints with this place. So I'm using tool number 60, and they call it a 10-degree bit. That's just up one side 10 degrees. So it's a 20-degree bit, really tiny little tip, and it's a 1/4-inch shank, and I like that. And it's relatively long, and I like that. So I selected that as my tool. Also, when I go in here, anytime I select these tools, I always edit the tool and come over here to cutting data and scroll to the bottom, and I turn this coolant off. It just constantly wants to add coolant to the toolpath, And then, of course, my machine doesn't have coolant, and then it gives me an error. It says your machine doesn't support coolant. I'm like, yes, I know. So every time I'm selecting a tool, I just go and turn the coolant option of the tool off. I went ahead and selected it. Then I've just left this alone, but you really shouldn't just leave this alone. And here's what I mean. When you select a tool here in your tool database, if you'll look down here, it tells you what the feeds and recommended feeds and speeds are for different types of material. So it always, has MDF laminate highlighted first, so it's 126 inches per minute. There's no way in the world I'm doing this at 126 inches a minute. So it says down here for hardwood, 54 inches a minute. So if you select that, it automatically puts that in here for you. Okay, that's about 1 inch per second. That's still a little quick for what I'm trying to do in hardwood, and I want to watch it. And this stuff is so small, it's going to break it. So I'm going to slow this down to more like, I don't know, 24 inches a minute. Yeah, it's going to make the cut take longer, but I'm not in any particular hurry. For some reason, it when I did that, it changed this back to flood for the coolant, so I got to change this to disabled. But that's what my feeds and my speeds are that I'm using for this. Then I came over here, over on geometry. And since this is a trace operation, what it's going to do, and it's a V-bit, it's going to go here and it's going to carve these things out essentially upside down. So we're looking at the back of the cross where it's going to be glued into the guitar. So I just went through each one of these crosses and clicked them, and that gave me all these different closed chains. I've got 18 crosses. And then you say, okay. And then then it shows you what the toolpath is going to look like. Let's run a simulation on this real quick. Go here to simulate. It's already got my tool chucked up. Ignore this, separate them. I'll talk about this in just a second. And I'll slow this down at first just so we can see what's happening. So you can see it's tracing that line, and because the bit is angled, it's carving this at an angle, and then it will move on to the next one and do all the rest of them. Just speed this up, let this hurry up and get finished. Now, the reason I need two different tool paths is it's been my experience that this trace operation rarely does it ever cut all the way through the wood. I know I could set an offset, but I don't want to set an offset because that means the front of this edge is going to be a little bit narrower than what I've designed it to be. And that means that this isn't going to match up with my step 2 that I'm about to show you. So what I do is instead of offsetting it and making it go deeper, I create a second toolpath to separate them. And what this is a 2D contour toolpath. So I just go here to say 2D contour, and it created this toolpath. And this time I've told it to use my 16th inch end mill, really small. Just making sure that I've got that disabled. Yeah, I do. And so with my 16th inch end mill, I'll make that 24 also. And then I come over here to my geometry and click on the crosses again. Okay. If you click on the inside of the cross, it would have carved around on the inside. I want to carve around the outside, so I'm clicking here. And that selected all of those. I'm not using any tabs. These things are tiny. And a thing that you can do, and I'll talk about tabs in a little bit, but one thing that you can do to avoid using tabs is use a downcut bit instead of an upcut bit. It'll shove the sawdust and the shavings down into the gap and kind of hold it into place. It works pretty well. I said okay to this, and now if I run those tool paths at the same time, let me regenerate this. If I run them at the same time, okay, so that's running the first one. And then it's come back here and it's going to slow it down. What's this? Slow it down again. What you can see it doing now is that bit is following where my tip of my angled bit was, but it's going to the outside of it. And that's going to cut all the way through the wood and give me a nice little puzzle piece that I can, you know, snap out. Maybe I need to use an X-Acto knife to get it completely cut out, but this does a pretty good job. And that makes these inlays for me. Okay, let's let it finish that up. That's for creating the little pieces of inlay. I haven't decided what I'm going to inlay it with. I'm not sure if it's going to be mother of pearl, if it's going to be abalone. I might just use maple, to be honest with you. I'm really kind of leaning towards wood inlays on this. That's my first step, is creating the inlays. Then my second step is to go over and create a whole separate. Well, before I show you this, I'm putting Skeeter's name on the base. Let me show you what I'm doing here. I'm going to do an engraving on the guitar. I'll talk about this in a minute. This is where all the crosses go. This is my fret markers. And I was going to put fret markers here on fret 24, but it was too narrow, and I didn't want to make them smaller and make it look off. So instead, I decided to inlay Skeeter's name. So his first name on fret 23, his last name on fret 24. So in order to do that, now this is a little bit harder. I mean, the crosses are simple. It's one thing spread far apart, but doing individual inlays like this, right next to each other, and they're so small. I mean, you know how big a fretboard is. This is just real tiny to work with. Now, obviously, these parts right here, it's not it. I don't have it rendered right because I don't care how it looks. I care how it works. Where all of the circles, voids, whatever you want to call them, in the letters are going to be, that's going to be the fretboard itself poking up through. So the letters are going to be outlining, and the fretboard is going to be the highlighted part inside here. Okay. In order to do this, this is a lot easier to be done if I have a solid piece of wood that's all cut out and ready just to snap into this like a Lego. So that's what this is. I basically took this sketch, flipped it 180 degrees where it's running backwards, and now, and this took a long time for me to figure out how to get this done for as small as it is. Usually when I'm doing something, like kind of something cutting, it's bigger, but this is much smaller. This is obviously the back of the letters that's going to be glued into the guitar neck, and I need that same thing to happen with that angled bit running around here, but there's an added complication. So yeah, I can run this toolpath. Well, let me forget about this one for just a second. I could run this toolpath here. And it would cut the letters out. Okay. But then it leaves these little islands of wood that need to go away. Everywhere that there was like this, the part where the walnut needs to stick up, I need those to go away. I don't know if that's easy or hard to see. If I change this material to this, maybe it's a little bit easier to look at. So everything here that should be a void is not. And so I need that to clean that up. And it took quite a while because it's so small. It took quite a while to figure out what bit do I need to buy that I don't have, because I've got quarter-inch end mills, 18th, eighth inch and stuff like that. Uh, I needed something much smaller. I needed something with a radius of about 1/64th of an inch, and I didn't have that. So I'll have that here tomorrow, but it's taken me going through this process to figure that out. So here's what this was. I I went in there, I created the sketch, called it reverse, and there's where I know that I'm going to have to hold this thing down on my CNC, and this is so thin. This is only going to be like an eighth of an inch. So I needed something more substantial. So I've got a block of wood here that I drew, and I extruded the letters up out of it. Not that I needed to, but because you're going to see in a second, because I'm going to want to make sure that this is perfectly flat. So I figured, well, I'll pull the letters up through it, and then I've got my main body, and then where I've uh, recessed this down to where the letters, this is what it should look like when it's done. So if we go back to the manufacturer tab, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a, a surfacing operation, a planer operation. Keep in mind, when you're looking at this, let's just understand what we're looking at for the size of scale. This is only 2 inches wide. 2 inches by about 1.5 inches. So this is tiny. I mean, this is tiny. I'll end up probably mounting this block on top of something else that I will be able to clamp down to the CNC. I'll use double-sided sticky tape, woodworker's tape for this. But I've got this here, and I extruded it, and then I came over here into my manufacturer tab, like I am, and I created these 3 toolpaths. One that's going to essentially plane the surface of that wood, one that's going to cut the letters out, and then one that's going to expose everything else. Because here, look what happens if I only do this. If I only do that, the letters are cut out, but there's no way for me to snap those letters into the neck because I got all this extra stuff. Plus, I've got all that stuff, all these little islands that need to go away. So I needed to run an adaptive clearing. But this was the hardest part of this because it's so small, trying to figure out what bit do I need to do this. And it turned out, so let me show you what I'm doing here for the flattening the bottom. This is just a 2D contour, and I'm just using a 1/4 inch end mill. All right, nothing fancy. Just the same 1/4 inch end mill that I've been using for everything else. Well, not for the carve. That was a round bottom, but anyway. Then I'm using that same bit, that 20-degree bit, to cut the letters because they need to mate up. Right, the glue is going to be mating in between these surfaces. So I've got this, and you can see all the selections that I made for this. I just went through and selected the bottom of these. One of the hard things to remember when you're in here, when you're working upside down like this, is that you have to select what the front looks like, not the back, so that the bit knows where to touch. And then finally, I had to go through here, and this was the hard one. I had to go through here and tell it to use this bit. So this is a 12 degree. Yeah, it's 12 degree because when they say 6.28 degree, they're talking about per side. So this is a very narrow bit with a tiny little point, and I'm using this, and it's a ball nose. So I'm using this to clear all the rest of the stock off of here and to get rid of those islands. And that took me a while to figure out what bit that I needed to do that. I mean, like hours. You just be glad you didn't sit through that. Now, when I run this toolpath and getting it to where it said no issues, so this is the surfacing operation. This is where it's running across and basically planing it. Now we've got the other bit coming through and carving the letters. But the longest toolpath is this last one. This is now I've got that 12-degree taper bit going through and clearing stock all over this thing. And even this bit, as tiny as it is, still isn't getting everything. I'm going to have to get in there with an X-Acto knife in a couple of spots. Like here. That's not going to go flush with the surface. So I'm going to have to, there's some things I'm going to have to cut out in several places. There's one right here, one right here, and it's the best I can do. I just haven't found a bit that just goes small enough for this. So I even tried. I built a fake bit in Fusion, and a 1/256th inch ball nose, basically a sewing needle, would do this. So this is going to be this will be me just in there, like I said, with an X-Acto knife, kind of cleaning some stuff up. But you can see now that it's created the negative or the positive version that should be able to flip over, and it'll remain attached to this board, so all the spacing stays the same. And then I'll just flip this over, put some glue in the holes on the fretboard, and glue this to it. And then when it's all done, all I have to do, well, so let's flip over here. The third step of all of this is to do the engraving, is to come over here and engrave all of this. So you can see how I laid out all the crosses, and this was tedious, but all of them end up exactly in the middle of the fret, of the two frets that they're in the middle of, and perfectly in the middle here. And so I did this. I went ahead and gave myself a little bit of walnut to it, and you can see how, because I wanted to try and see, what's this going to look like. I think a light colored wood, like some maple on top of my rosewood fingerboard, is going to look real pretty. Like I said, haven't decided that's what I'm going to go with, but it's definitely where I'm leaning. I don't know. We'll find out. But then if I come over here to the manufacturer tab on here, this is just a single toolpath. This is easy. Cutting this in is easy. And I wanted to mention this. If you're not going to do inlay work, this is all you need to do. Go over here, create yourself a 2D, where is it? 2D engrave toolpath. Pick whatever bit you're going to use. And by the way, the reason I'm using such a narrow bit is because when I try to use my 90-degree V bit, the engraving is so shallow that the wood ends up paper thin. It just wasn't going to work. So, but a 90-degree V bit is what I use for most anything else. But this was what did I end up with here? I forgot to save this. So what this actually is needs to be that other bit. Let me find it. Let me find it so I can show you. It needs to be this. The same bit that I'm using for these. So for this one, this was tool number 60. Make sure it's tool number 60 here. Number is the number of the tool in their database that you can download and put in Fusion. And make sure I'm using the same one, tool number 60. Okay, so I need to come over here. I need to make sure I'm using tool number 60, not 59. Okay, 20-degree V-bit. I've selected all of my geometry. That's Skeeter's real name. And now all I got to do is run the toolpath. Looks like it's going to start off up here. So I'll simulate it. Slow it down, make sure it's doing what I want it to do. Sure hope that comes back and cuts that hole out in the middle. Oh no, that's supposed to be there. That's right. I was thinking about the other piece. This is the piece of walnut that's still going to be there. Everything that you see here is walnut. No, sorry, not walnut, rosewood. And so the other stuff, the reason I needed to clear out the other things is so it will have room to fit inside. And this is what the little crosses look like. Sometimes this is better to set this at perspective instead of orthographic, but when you're dealing with small stuff like this, orbiting can be a little hard because you have to zoom in so far. But you get it. That V-bit goes in there and comes up and gives you those nice sharp edges. So now, once that's done, all I've got to do is take those crosses and glue them in here, and then take Skeeter's inlay and glue it in here, let it dry, take it to the bandsaw. Don't need to worry about the bandsaw and the crosses, but I'm going to take it to the bandsaw and saw this off. Now, at this point in time, keep in mind, the fretboard is flat. There's no point in trying to do this on a radius fretboard. You'll drive yourself mad. Now, I know some guys do when they're inlaying the plastic dots and they've done that with their fretboard already radius. That's fine. But when you're making your own thing like this, you need this to be flat. I mean, I suppose maybe you could get away with it, but why? It just makes more sense to do it like this. Now, the last step, making it actually a fretboard. So I don't have any of the other stuff drawn because there's no point in having it here. It just clutters up the look. I just want to see what I'm working on at this time. So here, what I've done is and I'm not going to go through the process. There's other videos out there for that. But I created my fretboard. I'm going to have it attached to another piece of plywood here so I can put clamps on it without worrying about running into it. And I'm just going to use either double-sided woodworker's tape, or I might even just use the super glue and blue tape method. I haven't really decided. It doesn't really matter because I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. But this is the fretboard. It's going to be a 1/4 inch thick. It's going to be a 7 1/4 radius because I thought Leo Fender was a genius when he came up with that. That's the most comfortable guitar neck you'll ever play. You'll never bend a note with a crud with it. Not really extreme, but this is for a bass guitar, and this is the same radius that my 67P bass has, and so I'm mimicking that for Skeeter. No, it's not a reissue. I don't do reissue. Also, I'm using blind frets, something that's really hard to do without a CNC. And I've got a bit for this. This is a 0.023 inch, 23 thousandths fret slotting bit made specifically for this. It works really well for the fret tangs. I've decided to use medium frets on this because every time I tried to go with the jumbos, they were taller than I wanted, and I'm going for low action on this. And so the mediums should require very little fret dressing when I'm all said and done with, if any. I drew my fret slots, extruded them down, got my neck made. Assume now at this point in time, by the time I'm doing this toolpath, everything else is glued in here. The crosses are in here. Skeeter's name is in here. All this type of stuff. All right. So then I come over here to Manufacture tab, and I'm going to create 3 toolpaths. One that's going to radius the fretboard, one that's just going to cut the slots, and the one's going to cut it the perimeter of the fretboard. And this is going to leave some tabs on there to where I have to get a little saw and cut the tabs off to completely free it away because I don't want to do this twice. So here's what it all looks like. Let's speed this up. So this is a 1/4 inch ball nose upcut mill, and this is going through and putting the curve on the fretboard. Once it's done with that, I'm going to slow it down because the fret slot jog gets, that was done. You just saw it. Right here it's showing you your second toolpath. That's where it's doing the fret slots. And you can see what it's doing. It's just going through there, and it's cutting the slots, and it's cutting them to where their depth is equidistant from the fretboard, so it matches the fretboard radius, which is really nice because I'm actually buying the frets from StewMac already pre-radiused for 7 1/4, which means the tangs will come down here, and I've got this cut about 2/1000ths of an inch deeper than the actual tang is, and now it's running around. It's cutting out my profile, and at that point in time, it's done, and it's ready for me to take off. I've got 8 tabs on here to hold it in place. Then I'll be able to take it off, and it will be ready for gluing onto the neck. That's what I've been working on for the last 2 days, is getting this put together and waiting for my router bit. If you ever had any questions about how Inlay works, or if you have more questions you want me to answer them, let me know. I'm new at this. I'm not an expert, so I'm learning as I go. But I have learned a lot. And if you get stuck and you're trying to do something similar, and like I said, if you wanted to and you didn't want to do the inlays, you could just do the engraving. Just have it engraved, that engrave operation. You saw it. And then go get yourself some epoxy. Put in a bunch of flakes of stuff in it and fill the holes until they're proud of the surface. Let it dry, and then just run your fretboard radius operation. And now you've got things that look like inlays. A lot less involved, that's for sure. And had I not been trying to learn as much as I could learn on this, like on my next guitar, I probably not going to do this inlay thing. It all depends on how it looks. There's something really nice about just good looking inlay, and you can really tell the difference between that and epoxy filled holes, which nothing against people who use epoxy filled holes, but they don't look like inlay. Not to me. Anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned.